Hey everybody, this is Delta Kilo for Second Wind, Into the Breach, out of the Hinnom Valley. March 9th, 2022, Wednesday, resuming with Episode 3, The Injustice of Justice, Part 2, The Conversation. Picking up where we left off last night, fast and loose. August 8th, 2019, Thursday. I drove down to Doral, Florida, specifically Southern Command. My business at Southern Command was to go to the DEERS office, Defense Enrollment Eligibility Reporting System. The DEERS office, that's where you get your military ID renewed. I didn't tell you I was in the military, did I? That's its own discussion. We're going to get into that, but we're not going to do it all right now. Bottom line, I had to go and get my military ID renewed. I go into a cluster of offices there. I get a number. I am waiting to be called so I can get my ID renewed. It just so happens that there's a gentleman there who I know, John Carlo Garrison Jr. Now, John Garrison Jr. is a name that's going to come up time and time again. There's no set of words, no explanation will be too much. Nothing that I would say will be too much to cover his part in this, his place in this. If it was him and him alone, that would almost cover everything that I need to talk about moving forward, getting up to the point of the police showing up at my door, and then my being arrested, and everything that happened after that. We'll go over it in bits and pieces. I want you to know, having gone through the case as exhaustively as I had, initially I thought what I was going to do had to be perfect, but I realized it doesn't have to be perfect, and I can tell you why. In the case, the primary narrative changes approximately 4 times. I looked that over, wondering how do they do that? How does it change? Why does it change? How do they justify these changes? I'll minimize my explanation of that and just say it's dates, as I move forward in the case, looking at the date line of what was said and when it was said, I can see that there are multiple dates where new information was added. And when new information was added or new actions took place, the case expanded or shifted or changed. The words themselves, what was being claimed, how it was being claimed, these talking points, the narrative, it was being modified, it was being edited, it was being expanded in any of a number of ways. And I can speak on every single part of it, and with confidence and a clean conscience. We'll get to all of that. So, right here, right now, I'm waiting to get my ID. John Carlo Garrison Jr. happens to work in another office right there in that same common area. He sees me, comes out, and begins to speak to me. There was a background at that point. You need to know this. Going back some months, for reasons of politics and other things like that, I had messaged John. He and I go back to about 2008. Yet another story, an important backstory, and I'm going to touch on that. But to the moment, to the day, to August 8th, 2019, and the Thursday when it all started off. It was that I had messaged him and I had not gotten a response. So John had come out to speak to me. I asked him how come he hadn't been returning my messages. He wants to talk about it outside. I tell him I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk to him outside. He says, why not? I say, because I know what you want to talk about. He says, what do you want to talk about? I say, Larry Washington. Larry Washington, that's another name. And this is an important sidebar. I actually didn't want to bring that up. I didn't want to say Larry's name. I didn't want to get into that. Bottom line, at one point I would have told you that Larry was a friend of mine. He and I went through some things together. We did some things together, participated in some things together, honorable things. And as such, I wish that he was not a part of this, but unfortunately he is. And something else that I made sure of, because I'm actually saying people's names out loud, and specifically so, having gone through the criminal case file, John's name, Larry's name, and multiple other names are specifically in the criminal case file, which is a matter of public record. So nobody can say anything about me. Well, wait a minute, you're just trying to get somebody in trouble. No, I'm telling a story that's true. No one can say, well, you're saying something that you don't really have to say just to try and gain a certain favor or to start a process of gaining momentum in people believing something about a certain person. Well, that's going to happen naturally anyway as I tell the story. But I'm going from the case file, man. This is just the truth. None of it's convenient. It's going to play out in my favor because I'm telling the truth. And the facts are in my favor. So the truth is in my favor. Right to it. I'm waiting to get my ID. John does not work in the ID cubicle. I've already told you what happened, the lead-in. I know what he wants to talk about. I tell him I don't want to talk about it. Now they're calling me to go get my ID. It didn't take but a couple of 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes from start to finish. When I got out, John was still there. So in this common area, in between all of these office doors, these office windows, John waited for me. Now he wants to go outside. We begin walking down the common hallway to the exit doors. That's where I was going. He's following me. I tell him right out of he's saying something. We're trading some casual conversation. I tell him, I say, hey man, don't follow me outside. I don't want to talk. I know what you want to talk about. I don't want to talk to you about it. He's being as John always was. It's relevant to the conversation. John was a very, very arrogant guy, very full of himself, very, very quick to simply dismiss someone else. Oh, what are the words? I don't know. Smug, haughty, contemptuous, condescending, arrogant, narcissistic. I'll end up telling things. How about that? Such a lofty word. I'll tell things as is applicable in moving forward in the story from episode to episode that will come back on my claiming he is this way, that will give much greater weight and evidence to these descriptors. You'll be able to draw your own conclusions. I've said that from the start. I want you to believe it at face value. You don't have to believe me. I think that just by doing what I'm doing right now and speaking on these matters, you'll believe all on your own. Time will tell. Next. Not only was it that John was determined to follow me outside and have this conversation, but I actually stopped to use the bathroom, to use the latrine. John came in, he used the latrine as well. No homo. Bottom line, I do what I need to, he does what he needs to. Now we're out in the center hallway. John follows me all the way outside. That will become a lot more important later. You'll see why when it is appropriate. So now we're outside, the conversation begins. All right, so here comes something. I'm going to introduce some points that end up, they're sensitive, they're mainstream, they touch on politics, they touch on race. I will ask all of you to be patient as I tell this story. Keep in mind, there's going to be this and another part, and I already have it in my head. I may have to add yet another. Bottom line, what's going on is that Larry used to be on my Facebook page. Entering the presidential election in the year 2016 for President Trump. Larry ended up having one voice. I had another voice. I knew some people. They were very good with some politics that I had to study. Largely, they would be factored into the political right, the Republican Party, conservatism, traditionalism, call it what you want. Now, Larry had made a claim that there was somebody on my page who was using white supremacist rhetoric. I deny that. Let me say that again. I deny that. I'll add to it as is necessary. Anymore, something that's become way, way, way too common is one person will say something and it's applauded by the mainstream media. Another person says that same thing and they are condemned for it. If you call one group racist for saying a certain thing, and another group says and does that exact same thing, and they are not called racist, when everything, all of the facts involved, the full explanation shows that their motivations are the same, not calling the other group racist is racist. I can stop right there and go right to the point that it is that there's tension now between me and Larry. We're not talking anymore. Larry spoke to John. I don't even have to get into that. It's only about Larry is making an allegation. John is trying to tell me that I need to do something, that I need to reach out to Larry, that I am somehow obligated, that I am somehow by default wrong. We get into an argument of politics and race. Now, relevant backstory. I had known John for years. Race was always a thing with him. John is one of these types who would say things like, black people can't be racist. Only white people can be racist against blacks. Black people can't be racist against whites. Except even saying that is racist. I'm going to leave that alone. We'll get back to it in due time. Now, so it is to the moment that I'm explaining through a better political lens, through a more experienced, more educated political lens, as I had been studying politics a lot more intently for years at that point, how I'm not obligated how I don't have to do anything, how him trying to make it out like I should feel bad at myself is ridiculous and absurd, how even though historically there are any of a number of things that can be discussed and assessed, we can use the word responsibility and words like that on much, much grander scales to try and say that I was somehow coming up short, had failed, had done something, and know anybody anything, simply was not true and was not in respect for the facts. John goes to telling a story about something that he alleges happened to him in Ranger Battalion when he was active duty U.S. Army as a young private at some period in the early 90s, 92, 93, 94, where he alleged he was called a very direct, very invasive, very insulting racial slur based on his race as a black man. Okay, I've heard this story from John before, 2 or 3 different times. It'll come out. John's got a really bad habit of making everything about race. Even when it isn't about race, he makes it about race. If an argument continues for too long and John isn't getting what he wants out of it, somehow he finds a way to inject race into it to try and cause guilt and shame and disorient and gaslighting. We're going to touch on all of that. Okay, now, I got to move forward and say that what was happening at this point is the conversation simply wasn't what John wanted it to be. Things were getting a little bit heated between the two of us. I was just getting sick and tired of him constantly trying to act like I'm a racist for things that I'm not, or I'm a racist at all. I might jokingly say, well, if I have white supremacist leanings, if there are people who I know who are white supremacist or a part of some organization or something like that, then I guess I must not be towing the party line in that I know John and had known him for years as an intellectual, as a fellow soldier going back to 2008, 2009, 2010. I guess I'm not a very good white supremacist, am I? Larry the same. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. I hate bringing his name up. Man, I wish it didn't have to come to that, but I'm afraid that it does. One thing at a time. Okay, next. One of the things I get to qualifying to John is how, and I was just touching on this, I don't know anything of like true mainstream racism. I look, we've all grown up with the things that we hear on television. You know, every now and so often you see demonstrations or you hear various names, various titles, various descriptors for these large groups, be they of black people, of white people, or Hispanic people, whether they are legal or illegal, as in just some manner of organization or something that is formally on behalf of some crime. Okay, a criminal organization, perhaps a prison gang or something like that. I'm saying this broadly, okay? I'm applying this to everybody and no one person specifically. It is that during this period of the conversation, while I'm trying to explain to John that I don't know anybody like that, and if I ever have, they never told me, and that nobody has ever approached me secretly, hey, how'd you like to be a part of our organization, our ghosty, spooky organization where you can hold down other races or come together or oppress minorities. During that, one of the things that I point out to him is that I've never heard anybody say anything like that. Now, one of these big talking point supporters on behalf of what mainstream calls white supremacy. One of the examples that I gave was of a race war. I said, man, I don't know anything about that. Nobody's ever talked to me about that. That's ridiculous. To which he says words to the effect of, oh, I don't know. Well, I don't know, man. I don't know with the way things are going now. This is the moment. Everything stopped right there. I had to take a breath. I'm looking at this man who I had known for over a decade. Dude, what are you talking about? Yeah, well, man, I don't know. With the way things are going now. The way what's going now? A race war? Have you lost your mind? Are you crazy? We went back and forth about this notion of a race war. Okay, so I am now to understand that John has morphed in his personal politics to a level of acceptance of hardcore extremist views. My observation, my opinion in listening to him talk is that John is now coming out as a black supremacist, that John is now embracing radical black nationalism, and by his own word accepts, if not approves of, the idea of a race war between blacks and whites. we go back and forth about that a little bit. Somehow the conversation morphs into, well, gee whiz, man, if that's really where you're coming from, if that's really what you think, if that's really what you believe, like some kind of full-scale civil war, like on an open battlefield between blacks and whites, well, if it ever comes down to that, and you're on one side and I'm on the other, I hope I'll see you so I can step out into the middle and shake your hand for one last time and wish you the best, tell you that I think you're wrong, and ask you to stop before anything really stupid happens and people actually begin hurting one another, and then walk to the far end of the battlefield so that I don't see you, John, out there and end up having to kill you or be killed by you, so that I don't have to fight you over anything that might get you hurt or me hurt or you killed or me killed by virtue of, I still feel stupid saying it, of a race war. And everything behind that, everything about it, a race war. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. It's an archaic notion. It'll never happen. But apparently John believed that it just might. And he followed up to speak of some people that he was in open association with, who by his own word were such the type of people that they would cut your throat, kill you, murder you, and then go on with their regular business without skipping a beat. Wow. How do you respond to that? What do you do about something like that? How do you think I should have felt at that moment? This is the beginning of this great big conversation that John wants to have with me, that he follows me outside about, that I made very clear I didn't want to have with him at all. And this is what he wants to come at me about? Ending part 2. The conversation. Episode 3. Delta Kilo. Second wind. Into the breach out of the Henham Valley. 24 hours from now, March 10th, Thursday, 2022. Part 3. Thank you for watching. I will see you in 24 hours.